Good morning. Welcome to today's edition of Glimpses of Grace and Glory. This is Wednesday, July 7th, 2021. Yesterday we were talking about purpose and perversion. God has a purpose in everything He created. Every star, every tree, every creature, and particularly in man, God created us to have a relationship with Him. And He wants to have that love relationship, that we love Him because He first loved us and He saved us by His grace and mercy. But so many times when we decide, well, you know what, I know God has a plan for my life. We saw that in Psalm 139, 15 and 16, that before we were born, God wrote out our entire life. And the best thing we can do is to walk in that plan. So maybe you've decided, I want to surrender to the Lord. He has saved me by His grace. His Spirit is within me. And I just want Jesus to continue His ministry on this earth through this body that He has purchased. I'm bought with a price and I'm not on my own. Therefore, I want to glorify God in my spirit and in my body that are His. Don't be surprised when you have decided that you want to serve God with purpose of heart, that you want His will to be done in your life, that there are obstacles all over the place. Because believe me, there will be obstacles every turn of the way. So many times there will be opposition because the forces of evil, Satan and his cohorts, do not want the gospel going forward. Therefore, he will throw everything in the way he can, even in attitudes of heart and carelessness and weariness, trying to get us lifted up in pride. And so, Barnabas and Paul were preaching, and they went to Lystra. And in Lystra, they saw a man there as they were preaching who hadn't walked since he was born. And Paul, perceiving that he had faith, said, "Stand up on your feet." And the man stood up and he was healed. Well, right away, the people start saying, hey, these are gods and not men. So you see how the devil comes in? He's going to try to lift them up in pride. Hey, I'll make you fall if I can, one way or the other. I'll lie to you, tell you God doesn't love you. I'll try to discourage you. I'll try to get you on the other side of the spectrum, and I'll lift you up in pride to think you're something great, and you are God's right hand, and you are being used, and just anything to get the focus off of Jesus Christ. So, Paul and Barnabas, the temple of Zeus was close by, and before they knew it, the people were coming with oxen and garlands and trying to do sacrifice, and they rent their clothes and said, hey, we're only men, don't do this. But they scarcely had restrained them, that they had not offered unto them. So then a group of Jews had come from another town, I think Iconium, and they came there and persuaded the people, and they dragged Paul out of the city, and they stoned him till they thought he was dead. It's believed that he was dead. Paul in another book was saying that he was called up to the third heaven and saw things that were not lawful for him to repeat. But very likely he did die. But Paul had such purpose of heart that when he was dragged out and then he was stoned, in chapter 14, let's read a few verses starting at verse 20. But as the believers gathered around him, he got up and went back into the town, right back into Lystra where he was stoned. And the next day he left with Barnabas for Derbe. Paul and Barnabas returned to Antioch of Syria. So he goes right back into the town, but then he leaves for Derbe. He's preaching there, and Paul and Barnabas returned to Antioch in Syria. And after the preaching the good news in Derbe and making many disciples, so they had many followers of Christ. After making many disciples and preaching the gospel there, Paul and Barnabas returned to Lystra. You would think, wow, Paul, have you not learned your lesson? They returned to Lystra, to Iconium, where the Jews had come from that stirred up the people, and Antioch of Pisidia. They go back to all these places. You know why? Because Paul's purpose didn't change. Just because he was stoned, but when they went there, they strengthened the believers. That's they encouraged them. They gave them the word. They encouraged them to continue in the faith. Continue in the faith. You see what I've been through? Continue in the faith. And they reminded the people, the believers and disciples, that they must suffer many things to enter the kingdom of heaven. We must through much tribulation enter the kingdom of the kingdom of God. I'm sorry, not the kingdom of heaven. So Paul wasn't deterred from his purpose whatsoever. Hey, Paul, this is where they stoned you. This is where the people are against you. Doesn't matter. this is my purpose. This is what God has told me to do, to make his name known to kings and to Gentiles. And it doesn't matter whether I get stoned or not. Yeah, I was stoned and I was raised to life again. Can you imagine even going there with all the black eyes and cracks in his head and laceration and bruises? I mean, imagine a person stoned and people say, Paul, you probably have a concussion. You know, you could die from a concussion. You should rest. You should sit around and wait and see what the results are. No, he didn't worry about that. He thought I've already died. And I die daily, and I don't care if I hazard my life for Christ. The gospel has to go forth. And I'm going to go town to town and do what the Lord has called me to do with purpose of heart. How many of us feel that way? With purpose of heart. Oh, I've faced some horrible hardships. I've tried to do the Lord's will, and my family was against me, and people made fun of me, and they cursed at me. I was down doing a street ministry, and the people cursed at me, and they threatened me. You think that should deter you from God's purpose? Of course they're going to hate us. Jesus said, if they hate me, they'll hate you also. If they've called the master of the house Beelzebub, what do you think they'll call the servants? But what is the purpose that God has for our life? Are we going to pervert that purpose by altering what God's purpose is, by watering it down, by bowing to the pressures? Or are we going to say, with purpose of heart, by the grace of God, by the strength of Christ within me, in my weakness, his strength is made perfect, I'm going forward and fulfilling the purpose of God by Jesus Christ in me. So may God help us to serve with purpose of heart, to first of all spend time with the Lord and say, what would you have me to do? That's what the Apostle Paul did. When the light shined around him and he was blind for 3 days, he sat there dealing with the Lord. And when Ananias came and laid his hands on him, and he said, what will you have me to do? Or before he came, when he was blinded on the road to Damascus, and he said, go into Damascus. The Lord said, go into Damascus, and it'll be told you what you must do. Well, we have orders from the Lord of what he would like us to do. May God help us to fulfill his purpose in our lives one day at a time, regardless of the obstacles that we go forward by the power of Jesus Christ.